I sat frozen as my mother-in-law poured red wine onto my hair like she was discarding trash. The table erupted in laughter, my husband laughing loudest while his mistress smirked like she had won a prize. The irony is, they called me a gold digger when I hold the controlling stake that will crush their family empire. Their biggest mistake was not the humiliation, it was divorcing me way too soon. My name is Violet Cox, and for the last 10 months, I had been trying to shrink myself until I was small enough to fit into the gilded cage of the Wexler family estate. I sat at the long mahogany dining table, my hands folded neatly in my lap, trying to ignore the way the air in the room felt heavy enough to choke on. The dining room of the mansion in Briar Glen, Illinois, was a masterpiece of intimidation. The walls were paneled in dark wood that seemed to swallow the yellow light from the crystal chandelier above us. And the silence was not accidental. It was a weapon. I was 34 years old, born and raised in this country, a woman who had built things from nothing. Yet in this room, I was treated like an exotic pet that had forgotten its tricks. I had chosen a simple red dress for the evening. It was modest, elegant, and understated. I had bought it specifically because I thought it would make me blend in, make me look like the dutiful wife Grant wanted me to be. I wanted to be invisible tonight. I wanted to survive dinner without a comment about my background or my lack of a recognizable pedigree. Marianne Wexler, my mother-in-law, sat at the head of the table. She was a woman who wore pearls like armor and smiled like a shark. She had spent the first course asking me pointed questions about the weather, her tone suggesting that even the rain was somehow my fault. Now, as the main course was cleared, she dabbed the corners of her mouth with a linen napkin and stood up. I looked up, expecting a toast, perhaps a rare moment of warmth. Marianne picked up her crystal goblet, filled nearly to the brim with a vintage Cabernet that probably cost more than my first car. She walked over to where I sat, her heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor. She stopped right behind my chair. I turned slightly to acknowledge her. A polite smile plastered on my face. Then the world turned cold and wet. There was no preamble, no stumble. Marianne simply tilted her wrist and poured the entire contents of the glass onto my head. The shock was absolute. The wine was cold, a shocking contrast to the warm, stuffy air of the dining room. It cascaded down my hair, stinging my eyes, dripping off my chin, and soaking into the fabric of my red dress. It felt heavy and sticky, smelling of fermented grapes and oak. I sat there, paralyzed, the liquid running down my back, pooling in the chair beneath me. I gasped, wiping my eyes, my mascara instantly running, stinging my vision. For 2 seconds, there was silence. Then came the laughter. It started with a giggle from my right, then a chuckle from the head of the table, and finally, a roaring, raucous sound that filled the cavernous room. I blinked the wine out of my eyes and looked at my husband. Grant Wexler was laughing the loudest. He sat opposite me, his handsome face twisted into a sneer of amusement. This was the man who had held my hand in the hospital when I had the flu. This was the man who had promised to protect me from the sharp edges of his family. Now, he looked at me not with love, or even pity, but with the cold detachment of a butcher looking at a piece of meat. Grant stopped laughing abruptly, his face settling into a mask of boredom. He reached under the table and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He slid it across the polished wood until it hit my wine-soaked placemat. "Sign the papers," he said. His voice was flat, rehearsed. "You will not receive anything." I stared at the envelope. Divorce papers. Next to him sat Sloane Mercer, the woman Marianne called a family friend, the woman who had been at every brunch, every gala, every intimate family gathering since I married Grant. Sloane was glowing, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed, her skin luminous. She placed a manicured hand protectively over her stomach, a gesture so theatrical it belonged on a soap opera stage. She sighed, a sound of exaggerated pity that made my skin crawl. "Oh, look at her," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "She looks like a drowned rat. It is almost sad. Really, I hope the stress does not ruin her complexion. We would not want her to look even cheaper than she already does. The table erupted again. Sloane looked at Grant, and he smiled at her a genuine, warm smile that he had not given me in months. The connection between them was tangible, a thick cord of complicity. She was pregnant. The rumor I had tried to ignore, the sickness in my gut I had tried to suppress, was sitting right there, mocking me. I felt a flash of light to my left. Paisley Wexler, Grant's younger sister, was holding her phone up. She was not even trying to hide it. She had the lens trained directly on my face, zooming in on the wine dripping from my nose, the black streaks of mascara ruining my cheeks. "Say cheese. Violet," Paisley taunted. "This is going to get so many views. The gold digger gets a shower." My hands were shaking, not from cold, but from a rage so pure and hot, it felt like it was burning a hole through my chest. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles turning white. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table. I wanted to tell them exactly who they were dealing with. I wanted to tell them that the woman they were humiliating could buy and sell this entire subdivision before breakfast. But I did not. I could not give them the satisfaction of a reaction. That was what they wanted. They wanted the white trash explosion. They wanted the scream. They wanted the drama to validate their narrative that I was unstable, unworthy, and out of control. I stood up slowly. My dress clung to my legs, heavy with wine. I pushed my chair back. It scraped loudly against the floor. The only unscripted sound of the evening. "I am leaving," I said. My voice was quiet, but it did not shake. Marianne laughed, a high, tinkling sound. "Oh, you are definitely leaving, dear. But not on your own terms." She snapped her fingers. The double doors to the kitchen swung open, and two men in dark uniforms marched in. I recognized one of them. It was Jerry, the head of their private security detail. I had made him coffee once when he was stuck at the gate in a snowstorm. He refused to meet my eyes. "Escort Ms. Cox off the property," Marianne commanded, waving her hand as if shooing away a fly, "and make sure she does not take any silverware on her way out." Jerry grabbed my arm. His grip was firm, painful. "Ms. Cox, please," he muttered under his breath. Just barely audible. "Do not make this harder." I tried to pull my arm away. "I can walk," I said through gritted teeth, but they did not let me walk. The second guard grabbed my other arm. They began to drag me. I stumbled, my heels slipping on the polished floor. I was being hauled out of my own marriage, out of the life I had tried so hard to build. Like a criminal. Grant did not look away. He watched every second of it. He watched his wife being manhandled by hired muscle, and he picked up his glass of wine and took a sip. "Sign the papers. Violet," he called out as I was dragged toward the front door. "We will mail you a copy. Do not come back." They hauled me through the grand foyer, past the portraits of Wexler ancestors who looked down with disapproving glares, and through the heavy oak front doors open. The night air hit me like a physical blow. It was November in Illinois, and the wind cut through the wet silk of my dress, chilling me to the bone instantly. They did not just escort me to the driveway. They dragged me all the way to the iron gates at the perimeter of the property. The pavement was rough under my feet as I stumbled. My shoes were ruined. Jerry pushed me forward, and I nearly fell onto the asphalt of the public road. The gate buzzed and began to close slowly, a wall of black iron shutting me out. I stood there, gasping for breath, shivering violently. The smell of the wine was overpowering now, sickeningly sweet and sharp. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, smearing the makeup further. I heard voices. I turned around and saw them, the neighbors. Mrs. Gable from the estate across the street was standing by her mailbox, her phone raised. Two teenagers were jogging past, but they had stopped, pointing and whispering. "Did you see that?" one of them asked. "That is the Wexler wife. She looks wasted." The other laughed. The humiliation was total. It was a spectacle designed for an audience. They had not just wanted to end the marriage. They wanted to destroy my dignity. They wanted to strip me bare and leave me shivering on the curb so that no one would ever take me seriously again. I wrapped my arms around myself. trying to preserve whatever body heat I had left. My hair was plastered to my skull, freezing in the night wind. I could feel the eyes of the neighborhood on me, judging, laughing, pitying. I looked back at the house. The windows were glowing with that warm yellow light. I could imagine them back at the table now. Marianne was probably ringing the bell for dessert. Sloane was probably resting her head on Grant's shoulder. Paisley was probably uploading the video to her private story, captioning it with something cruel and witty. They thought this was the end. They thought they had discarded a piece of trash. They thought I was broken. I stopped shivering. A strange clarity washed over me, colder than the wind, sharper than the wine. I straightened my spine. I lifted my chin. I pushed the wet hair out of my face. They thought they were dealing with Violet Cox, the nobody from nowhere who got lucky. They had no idea they had just declared war on a woman who commanded an empire. I am going to destroy them. I thought. The thought was not frantic. It was not hysterical. It was calm. It was factual. I will not just sue them. I will not just take half. I will dismantle their lives brick by brick. I will take the roof over their heads. I will take the companies that give them their arrogance. I will take the reputation they value more than their souls. If they want to make me a joke, I will make them an example. I took a step away from the gate, ready to walk to the main road to call a car, but something caught my eye. I looked up at the stone pillar of the gate. There, discreetly embedded in the masonry, was the lens of the new security camera system. The little blue light was blinking steady and rhythmic. I froze. I remembered something Grant had said 2 weeks ago. He had insisted on upgrading the perimeter security. He had personally overseen the installation of this specific camera, adjusting the angle himself. At the time, I thought he was being protective. I thought he was worried about burglars. But as I looked at the angle of the lens, I realized exactly what it was pointing at. It was not pointing at the road. It was not pointing at the approach. It was pointing directly at the spot where the security guards had thrown me out. It was framed perfectly to capture my humiliation, my ruined dress, my tears, and my isolation. He had not just planned the dinner, he had planned the exit. He had staged the entire night to create this exact footage. He wanted evidence of my breakdown. He wanted a video he could show in court to prove I was unstable, or a drunk, or simply unfit. Grant had been planning this for weeks. I stared directly into the lens of the camera. The red wine dripped from my chin onto the pavement. I did not wipe it away. I did not look away. I let him have his shot. I let him record the monster he thought he had created. I looked into the black eye of the camera, and for the first time that night, I smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator who has just realized the cage door was left unlocked. "Record this, Grant," I whispered to the cold wind. "Keep it safe, because you are going to need something to watch when you have nothing else left." I turned my back on the camera, on the house, and on the name Wexler. I began to walk down the dark road, the cold biting at my skin, but inside, I was already burning the world down. The execution was over. The war had just begun. 9 months. That is how long it took for my life to go from a fairy tale to a crime scene. Standing on the cold pavement outside the Wexler estate, shivering in my wine-soaked dress, my mind did not go to the future, not yet. It snapped back to the beginning, to the moment I let Grant Wexler walk into my life and convince me that he was different. It was late February in Lake Haven. The charity gala was one of those obligatory events that people with money attended not to help anyone, but to be seen helping people. The room smelled of expensive perfume and stale ambition. I was there for work, strictly speaking, though nobody knew that. I was scouting potential acquisitions, looking for failing nonprofits that had good data infrastructure but bad management. It was the kind of thing my company, North Star Gridworks, did quietly in the background. But that night, I was not Violet Vale, the CEO. I was just Violet Cox. I had dressed the part. I wore a charcoal gray dress I had bought off the rack at a department store. It fit well, but it lacked the aggressive sparkle of the designer gowns around me. No diamonds, no name-brand clutch, just me, holding a glass of sparkling water, standing in front of a painting that looked like someone had thrown a plate of spaghetti at a canvas. "I hate this one," a voice said beside me. I turned to see Grant. He was charming then. That is the thing people forget about monsters. They do not start out with claws. He was handsome in a way that felt approachable. His tuxedo tie slightly undone, his hair not perfectly gelled. He looked like he was suffering through the event. Just like me. I smiled. "It is certainly energetic," I said. "It is pretentious garbage," he corrected with a boyish grin. "It is priced at $5,000 because the artist knows the people in this room have more money than taste. I am Grant, by the way." "Violet," I said. He shook my hand, and I felt his eyes do a quick scan. It was subtle, but I have been in boardrooms with sharks for a decade. I know when I am being appraised. He looked at my wrist, no watch. He looked at my neck, no necklace. He looked at my shoes, sensible, not flashy. His posture relaxed. It was a physical shift, as if he had realized he did not have to put on a performance. "So, Violet," he said, leaning in as if sharing a secret, "what brings you to this den of vipers? Are you a donor, a frantic organizer, or just lost?" "I'm just here to support a friend." I lied smoothly. "I work in data analysis. Just a boring desk job. I crunch numbers." Grant's eyes lit up, not with admiration, but with relief. "Data analysis," he repeated. "That sounds honest. I like that. I am surrounded by people who do not actually work. My family owns Wexler Holdings, real estate. Mostly. It is exhausting. Everyone I meet is trying to sell me something or marry me." He laughed, but the joke had a sharp edge. I kept my face neutral. I knew who he was. I knew his family's company was leveraged to the hilt, though the public did not know that yet. But standing there, listening to him talk about how much he hated the artificiality of his world, I felt a tug of interest. He seemed self-aware. He seemed grounded. "I am not trying to sell you anything, Grant," I said, "and I doubt you are trying to marry me," he joked, though his eyes lingered on my face. "You look like you value your sanity too much." We spent the rest of the night in a corner, talking. He asked me questions, but looking back, they were not the questions of a man interested in my soul. They were the questions of a risk assessor. "Where did you grow up?" he asked. "Ohio," I said. "A small town you have never heard of." "My parents were teachers." "Teachers." He nodded approvingly. "Salt of the earth. Good values. Not like the people here." My mother would have a heart attack if she knew I was talking to a woman who actually works for a living. I thought he was being self-deprecating. I thought he was mocking his mother's snobbery. I did not realize he was giving me the user manual for his own prejudices. He walked me to my car, a 3-year-old sedan I kept for days like this. He looked at it and smiled. "I like you." "Violet," he said, leaning against the driver's side door. "You are real. You are not asking me for a ride in a limo. You are not asking me where I summer. It is refreshing." He called me the next day, and the day after that. The courtship was fast. 3 months. That is all it took. In the business world, a 3-month merger is considered reckless. In love, I told myself it was passion. Grant played the role of the humble prince perfectly. He took me to diner breakfasts instead of 5-star brunches. He told me he wanted a life that was simple. He complained constantly about the pressure his father, Howard, put on him to marry well. "I do not want a merger, Violet," he told me one night over pizza in my small apartment. "I want a partner. I want someone who loves me, not the checkbook." I fell for it. I fell for it because I was lonely. I had spent 10 years building North Star, guarding my identity, suspecting everyone who approached me. Here was a man who seemed to love me specifically because I was a nobody. It felt safe. It felt like I could finally take off the armor. When he proposed, it was in a park, not a palace. There were no photographers. The ring was modest, a simple solitaire that he proudly told me was classic, not gaudy. "When you know, he whispered against my hair. "Why wait? Why play games? Let us just be us." I said yes. I ignored the little voice in the back of my head that asked why he never asked to meet my friends. I ignored the fact that he never asked deep questions about my career. Settling for the vague data stuff explanation, I thought he respected my privacy. Then came the introduction to the family. The dinner at the Wexler estate. 2 weeks after the engagement. Should have been the moment I ran. Marianne Wexler did not greet me with a hug. She greeted me with a clipboard, metaphorically speaking. She sat in the drawing room, sipping tea, and looked me up and down for a full minute before speaking. "So," she said, her voice dry as parchment, "Grant tells me you are a worker. I am an analyst." "Yes," I said, keeping my head high. "And your family?" Marianne asked, "What are their connections?" "They are retired." I said, "We do not have connections, Mrs. Wexler. We have family dinners." Marianne made a sound in her throat, something between a cough and a laugh. How quaint. Grant was sitting next to me. He squeezed my hand, but he did not speak up. He did not say, "Mom, be nice." He just smiled that tight, neutral smile I would come to hate. Throughout the wedding planning, the disrespect was constant and granular. Paisley, his sister, asked me if I was buying my dress on clearance. "I know budgets are tight for normal people," she said, looking at her phone. "I can send you a coupon code." Howard, his father, never addressed me directly. He would speak to Grant about me while I was standing right there. "Does she understand the prenup?" Grant has it been explained to her in simple terms. The prenup. That was the biggest red flag of all, and I marched right past it. Grant brought it up one night, looking pained. "My parents are insisting," he said, rubbing his temples. "It is just standard family policy. It protects the family trust. It basically says, what is mine, and what is yours, is yours. I know you do not care about the money, so it is just a formality, right?" I signed it without reading the fine print. I did not care. I had my own assets protected in offshore trusts and LLCs that had nothing to do with Violet Cox. If they wanted to protect their debt-ridden empire from me, fine. It amused me. I signed it because I wanted to prove him right. I wanted to be the woman who didn't care about money. The wedding was small. "Intimate," Grant called it. "Cheap," I heard Marianne whisper to a cousin. I invited no one from the business world. Just a few paid actors I hired to pose as friends from college, to flesh out my side of the aisle. It was lonely, walking down that aisle toward a family that looked at me like I was a stain on the carpet. But Grant was smiling at the end of it. And for a moment, I thought it was enough. The cracks started showing immediately after the honeymoon. I had kept my apartment in the city. It was a high-security penthouse, actually. But Grant only ever saw the small studio on the second floor that I used as a decoy address. I told him I needed it for late nights at work when I could not make the commute back to Briar Glen. I expected him to be annoyed. I expected him to want me home every night. Instead, he was thrilled. "That makes sense," he said, checking his watch. "It saves gas. And honestly, it is good you have your own space. You know how intense my mother can be. It is better if you stay out of the way sometimes. Stay out of the way." It became the theme of our marriage. I went to work early. I came home late. I paid for my own gas, my own clothes, my own medical bills. Whenever I offered to pay for dinner, Grant never argued. He never reached for the check. "You like being independent," he would say. "I do not want to take that away from you." It wasn't respect. It was miserliness. He was saving money on a wife. The breaking point or the moment I should have broken it happened 2 months ago. We were hosting a dinner for some of Howard's business associates. I was wearing the red dress, the same one that was now ruined. I was trying to be the perfect hostess. I was making conversation with a banker from Chicago. Marianne tapped her glass for attention. "Everyone," she announced, her voice slurring slightly. "I just want to propose a toast to my son, Grant, for his patience." The table went quiet. "It takes a special kind of man," she continued, smiling sweetly at me, "to take on a charity project. We are all so proud of you, Grant, for giving Violet a glimpse of how the other half lives. It is very noble, like adopting a stray." The room froze. The banker next to me looked down at his plate, embarrassed. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at Grant. This was it. This was the moment. He had to say something. He had to tell her to stop. He had to defend his wife. Grant looked at his mother. Then he looked at me. He did not look angry. He looked bored. He picked up his wine glass. To patience, Grant said. He drank. He let the insult stand. He validated it. He agreed with it. Later that night, in our bedroom, I confronted him. She called me a stray. Grant, a charity project. He shrugged, taking off his tie. You are being sensitive, Violet. She is just old-fashioned. And look, let us be honest. He turned to look at me, and his eyes were cold. You have a better life here than you ever would have had on your own. You have this house. You have the name. You do not have to worry about rent or bills. Is that not enough? Do you really need her to respect you? 2. That seems greedy. I stood there, stunned. I thought you loved me because I wasn't like them, I whispered. Grant laughed. It was a short, dry sound. I love you because you are easy, Violet. You are low maintenance. You do not ask for diamonds. You do not ask for galas. You are cost-effective. He turned off the light and went to sleep. I lay awake all night, staring at the ceiling. I remembered the line he used when he proposed. I love you because you do not care about money. Lying there in the dark, I finally translated it. He did not love me because I was humble. He loved me because he thought I was poor. He loved me because he thought I had no power. He loved me because he thought that no matter what he or his family did to me, I would have nowhere else to go. He thought he had married a victim. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in months, I did not cry. I started to calculate. If he liked cost-effective, I was going to show him the true cost of doing business with me. That was 2 months ago. I started gathering my files the next morning. I started recording the conversations. I started preparing the trap. But standing outside the gate tonight, watching the red light of the camera blink, I realized I had underestimated them. I thought I had time. I thought I would leave on my own terms. They struck first. They thought they had won. But as I walked toward the main road, the cold wind drying the wine in my hair, I reached into the hidden pocket of my ruined dress. My fingers closed around the cold metal of a flash drive I had carried with me every day for weeks. It contained the encryption keys to the Wexler family's entire digital life. Grant chose me because he thought I had nothing. He was about to find out that I own everything. If the wedding was the contract signing, the months that followed were the orientation period for a job I never applied for. I had assumed that marrying Grant meant I would be his partner. I was wrong. To the Wexlers, I was raw material. I was a lump of unrefined clay that Marianne Wexler was determined to sculpt into something that would not embarrass her at the country club. The training began the week we returned from our honeymoon. Marianne called it integration. I called it an erasure of self. It started with the wardrobe. Marianne would come into the master suite at 7 o'clock in the morning, her heels clicking on the hardwood like a metronome counting down the seconds of my patience. She would walk into my closet, the one Grant and I shared, and start pulling things off hangers. My cardigans, my comfortable slacks, the floral blouses I liked because they reminded me of the garden my mother kept in Ohio. Marianne would hold them up with 2 fingers, as if they were contaminated with a contagious disease. No, she would say, dropping a blue blouse onto the floor. Absolutely not. This shade of blue screams mid-level management. We do not wear this. It was not a suggestion. By noon that day, a personal shopper would arrive with a rack of clothes that looked exactly like Marianne's wardrobe. Just 30 years younger, beige, cream, charcoal, navy, the fabrics were cashmere and silk, costing more than most people made in a month. But on me, they felt like uniforms. They were stiff. They were cold. They were designed to make me blend into the walls of the estate, to turn me into just another piece of expensive, silent upholstery. Then came the speech lessons. We do not say, yeah, Marianne corrected me over tea one afternoon. We say, yes, and we do not laugh with our mouths open. Violet, it looks horse-like. We chuckle, discreetly. I sat there, sipping tea that tasted like potpourri, and nodded. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that I had negotiated mergers worth $400 million using words a lot rougher than yeah. I wanted to tell her that my horse-like laugh was the only thing that felt real in this mausoleum of a house, but I stayed silent. I told myself it was the price of admission. I told myself that every family had its quirks, and that if I just followed the rules, eventually they would see me, but they did not want to see me. They wanted to see a reflection of themselves. If Marianne was the architect of my misery, Paisley was the demolition crew. Grant's sister was 24, bored, and vicious. She treated my presence in the house as a personal insult, a glitch in her perfect reality that she needed to correct. Her favorite game was called The Accident. It happened usually when we had guests. The first time, it was a charity luncheon in the garden. I was wearing a white linen dress that Marianne had forced me into. I was actually feeling confident for once, holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres, trying to be helpful. Paisley breezed past me, talking on her phone. She did not even look at me. She just jutted her elbow out at the precise moment I passed. The tray tipped. The smoked salmon appetizers with their dill sauce slid right off the silver platter and landed squarely on my chest. The oil stained the white linen instantly, a bright orange mark of shame. Paisley stopped and turned around, her hand covering her mouth in a performance of shock that would not have fooled a toddler. "Oh my God," she gasped, loud enough for half the garden to hear. "Violet, you are so clumsy. Mom told you not to carry the heavy tray. You really should leave the serving to the staff. It is confusing for everyone when you try to help." The guests chuckled. A few of them looked at me with pity. I stood there, wiping salmon off my dress, burning with humiliation. "I am sorry." I mumbled. "I tripped. You always trip." Paisley whispered as she leaned in to help me, her voice dropping so only I could hear. "You trip over your own feet. You trip over your words. You are just a mess, aren't you?" She patted my arm and walked away, smiling. Then there was Howard, my father-in-law. Howard did not bully me. That would have required him to acknowledge my existence. Howard practiced a form of aggression that was entirely silent. To him, I was an object that Grant had brought home, like a new golf club that he didn't particularly like the weight of. We would sit at dinner, those long, excruciating dinners, and he would speak exclusively to Grant. He would ask Grant about the business. He would ask Grant about the car. He would ask Grant about the weather. If I spoke, Howard would wait for me to finish, pause for 1 second, and then continue talking to Grant as if I had not made a sound. "The market is volatile right now," Howard would say to his son. "I actually read a report that suggests the volatility is stabilizing in the tech sector." I ventured once, unable to help myself. Silence. Howard cut a piece of steak. He chewed it slowly. He swallowed. "Grant," he said, looking straight at my husband, "check the bonds in the trust. I do not like the look of the yield." I was invisible. I was a ghost haunting a banquet. The worst part was the exclusion. Every Sunday, after brunch, the family would retreat to Howard's study for family business. The heavy oak doors would close, leaving me standing in the hallway. The first time it happened, I started to follow Grant in. Howard stopped at the threshold. He turned to me, his face blank. "This is for family." "Violet," he said. "I am family." I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I married Grant." Howard looked at me with eyes that were as flat and gray as coins, blood only. He said, "You would not understand the complexities. Go help Marianne with the flowers." The door clicked shut. I stood in the hall, staring at the wood grain. You would not understand. The irony was sharp enough to cut. Inside that room, they were likely discussing how to juggle their mounting debts, how to leverage one asset to pay off another. I knew their financials were a house of cards, because I had already begun to look. If they had let me in, I could have saved them. I could have fixed their cash flow problems in a week, but their arrogance was the lock on the door, and their prejudice was the key. I waited for Grant to defend me. That was the hope I clung to, the life raft in this ocean of cold water. But Grant was changing. The man who had eaten pizza with me on the floor of my apartment was gone. In his place was a man who seemed constantly irritated by my very existence. The environment of the house was seeping into him, overwriting the version of him I loved. He started echoing his mother. "Why do you have to work so late?" he complained one evening when I came back from the city. I had actually been at a board meeting for North Star, deciding the fate of a tech startup in Austin. But to him, I was just a low-level analyst grinding for a paycheck. "It is my job, Grant," I said, kicking off my heels. "I have responsibilities." "It makes us look bad," he scoffed, pouring himself a drink. "People ask why my wife is punching a clock. It looks like I cannot provide for you. It is embarrassing." "Violet, can't you just quit?" "My mother says you look tired all the time. It is aging you." "I like my work," I said quietly. "You like data entry," he sneered. "God, you really are small-minded sometimes. You have access to this world." He gestured around the opulent, suffocating room. "And you prefer staring at spreadsheets." He didn't know that those spreadsheets controlled billions. He didn't know that the small-minded work I did was the only reason the economy of this state was functioning smoothly. I stopped arguing. I started documenting. I treated my marriage like a failing company. I detached. I observed. I recorded. Every insult went into a mental ledger. Every time Paisley smirked, I filed it away. Every time Howard looked through me, I added it to the balance sheet. Every time Marianne corrected my grammar, I calculated the interest. I became a spy in my own home. But the final blow, the one that shifted me from observation to action, happened on a Tuesday. I was in the living room, reading a book. Grant had left his iPad on the coffee table. He was careless with technology because he didn't understand it. He thought passwords were for other people. The screen lit up with a notification. It was an email. The preview popped up clearly on the lock screen. Subject reservation confirmation. Le Bernardin. My heart skipped a beat. Le Bernardin was in New York. Grant had told me he was going to New York for a boring real estate conference next weekend. I sat forward. I knew I shouldn't look. But the analyst in me needed the data. I swiped the screen. The passcode was his birthday. Predictable. I opened the email. It was a reservation for 2. Friday night, the best table in the house. But it wasn't the reservation that stopped my breath. It was the calendar invite attached to it. Grant had synced his personal calendar to the family cloud. I scrolled back. Dinner with S. Chicago. Weekend away. Aspen. Late lunch. The Ivy. S. Sloan. The dates matched perfectly with the nights Grant had come home late, claiming he was stuck at the office or dealing with a crisis at a construction site. They matched the weekends he had gone on golf trips with his college buddies. He wasn't just cheating, he was dating her. He was living a full parallel life with the woman his mother adored. I heard footsteps. Grant walked into the room, toweling his hair dry from a shower. I stood up, holding the iPad. My hands were shaking, not from sadness, but from the sheer audacity of it. "Who is S?" I asked. Grant stopped. He looked at the iPad, then at me. He didn't look guilty. He looked annoyed that he had been caught, like a teenager whose mom found his cigarettes. He walked over and snatched the device from my hand. "You are snooping now?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. I saw the calendar. Grant. "Who is she?" "Is it Sloan?" He laughed. It was a cruel, dismissive sound. "You are so paranoid. Violet, it is pathetic. Sloan is a family friend. She is helping me with interior design for the new project. Those are business meetings." "Business meetings in Aspen?" I asked. "Business meetings at Le Bernardin on a Friday night." "Do not lie to me." Grant stepped closer. He toweled over me, using his height to intimidate. "You know what your problem is?" He spat. "You are insecure. You know you do not belong here. So you are constantly looking for reasons to blow it up. You are an outsider. Violet, you will always be an outsider. You do not understand how our world works. We have friendships. We have connections. Not everything is some sordid little affair like you people have in your trailer parks. You people." The slur hung in the air. Marianne walked in at that moment. She must have been listening from the hall. She looked at Grant, then at me. She didn't ask what was wrong. She knew. She walked over to the mantel and adjusted a porcelain figurine. Her back to me. Grant is right. Violet, she said calmly, you are becoming hysterical. It is very unbecoming. He is cheating on me. Marianne, I said. Marianne turned around. Her face was a mask of cold porcelain, just like the figurine she had touched. Grant is a Wexler, she said. He has needs. He has a position to uphold. He needs a partner who understands the pressures of his life. He needs someone standard, someone who knows the rules without being taught. Not a girl with no name and no background who thinks she can demand explanations. She looked at me with pity. Genuine, terrifying pity. If you were smart, you would stop asking questions and be grateful you are even in the room. I looked from Marianne to Grant. They stood together, a united front of arrogance and delusion. They truly believed that their bloodline gave them the right to use people. They believed that I was lucky to be cheated on by a Wexler. Something inside me snapped, but it wasn't a break. It was a lock clicking into place. I realized then that there was no saving this marriage. There was no working it out. There was only the exit, and the exit needed to be scorched earth. I looked at Marianne. I looked at her expensive dress, her perfect hair, and her sneering face. I thought about my bank accounts. I thought about the sheer, staggering amount of wealth I controlled, wealth that could buy this house and turn it into a parking lot without denting my portfolio. They were calling me a beggar while standing on a floor that I could buy out from under them. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I smiled, a small, tight smile. Okay, I said softly. I understand. Grant relaxed, thinking he had won, thinking he had beaten me into submission. Good, he said. Now, I am going to the study. Do not disturb me. He walked away. Marianne gave me one last dismissive look and followed him. I stood alone in the living room. He needs someone standard, she had said. Not a girl with no background. They were right. They didn't need a girl with no background. They needed a bank. And they had just insulted the only solvent bank in the room. I walked over to the window and looked out at the sprawling lawn. I took a mental picture of the view. I wanted to remember it, because the next time I looked at this view, I intended to own the window I was looking through. I pulled out my phone, my secure work phone, not the personal one Grant monitored. I opened a new note. I titled it, The Wexler Liquidation. Item 1, the debts. Item 2, the mistress. Item 3, the pride. I was going to take it all. I was not just a wife anymore. I was the repo man, and I was coming to collect. If the previous months had been an exercise in emotional endurance, the weeks leading up to the wine incident were a lesson in forensic observation. I stopped looking at my marriage as a relationship and started viewing it as a crime scene that was being staged in real time. The central piece of evidence was Sloane Mercer. To the casual observer, Sloane was just a friend of the family. She was the daughter of a business associate of Howard's, a woman with a pedigree that read like a thoroughbred stud book. She was blonde, naturally. She was slender, effortlessly, and she was always, inexplicably, there. It was not just that she attended the parties, it was the way she moved through the Wexler house. She did not ask where the bathroom was. She did not ask for a coaster. She knew which drawer in the kitchen held the silver teaspoons and which cabinet hid the crystal tumblers. I began to track her proximity to Grant. It was a subtle, choreographed dance directed by Marianne. At a barbecue in late August, I watched from the patio door. Grant was holding a plate of food. He was talking to a group of men, looking distracted. Sloane drifted over. She did not interrupt him. She simply reached out, took the plate from his hand, picked off the grilled mushrooms which Grant is violently allergic to, and handed it back to him. She did it without looking at him. He accepted it without thanking her. It was a gesture of intimacy that screamed louder than any kiss. It implied a history. It implied a level of care that bypassed conscious thought. I had been married to Grant for nearly a year, and I still had to remind myself to check ingredients for him. Sloane did it by muscle memory. I walked into the kitchen a few days later to find Rosa, one of the older housekeepers, polishing silver. Rosa liked me. I was the only one in the house who asked about her grandchildren by name. Rosa, I said, leaning against the counter. How long has Sloane been coming around? Rosa hesitated. She rubbed a smudge on a fork with unnecessary vigor. Miss Sloane, Rosa said, not meeting my eyes. She grew up with Mr. Grant. They went to the same camps, the same schools. They seem very close, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Rosa stopped polishing. She looked over her shoulder to make sure the hallway was empty. Mrs. Wexler Marianne, she always said it, Rosa whispered, her voice dropping to a tremor. She said you cannot mix wine with water. She said the family needs to keep the line clean. She said Sloane was the only one who could give Grant a legacy. A legacy. It was a chilling word. It reduced Grant to a biological function and me to a genetic error. Marianne did not just want a rich daughter-in-law. She wanted a breeder, and she had decided long ago that my DNA was not sufficient for the Wexler empire. I went back to my studio apartment in the city that afternoon. I needed to think. I needed to cross-reference the data. I pulled up Grant's shared calendar again. I placed it side by side with the credit card statements I had managed to access through a shared household account they thought I was too stupid to monitor. The pattern was undeniable. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Grant had site visits or client dinners that kept him out until midnight. I checked the toll road transponder records for his car. On those nights, his car was not at construction sites. It was parked in a residential zone in Lake Forest. I ran a property search on the address. The house belonged to a trust, but the trustee was listed as Mercer Family Holdings, Sloane's house. He was practically living there. But infidelity is common. Men like Grant cheat. It is almost a cliché. What bothered me was the confidence. They were not hiding it well. They were leaving breadcrumbs, almost as if they did not care if I found them, or more disturbingly, as if they were waiting for a specific timeline to expire before they dropped the hammer. I decided to check the foundation of my safety, the prenup. I kept a digital copy of every document I signed. It is a habit from running a billion-dollar company. You never trust the paper in someone else's hand. I had scanned the prenuptial agreement the day I signed it. Right before I handed it back to the Wexler family lawyer, I opened my safe in the city apartment and pulled out the hard drive. I loaded the original PDF. Then, I drove back to the estate. Grant was out. Marianne was at the club. I went into Grant's home office. I knew the combination to the wall safe because I had watched him punch it in from the reflection of a framed picture across the room 3 months ago, 1985, his birth year. The man had zero security hygiene. I opened the safe. There it was, the heavy cream-colored envelope containing our marriage contract. I took it to the desk and laid it out. I opened the PDF on my secure tablet. I began to compare them, line by line. Page 1 matched. Page 2 matched. Page 5 stopped my heart. In my digital copy, Clause 7b stated that in the event of a divorce due to proven infidelity, the injured party, me, would be entitled to a lump sum settlement of $500,000 and retention of all personal property. It was not a lot of money to me, but it was a penalty. It was a consequence. I looked at the paper version on the desk. Clause 7b was different. In the event of dissolution of marriage for any reason, all assets remain the sole property of the original owner. The requesting party waives all rights to alimony, settlement, or support. They had changed the page. It was a physical forgery. They had swapped out the sheet of paper after I signed the back page, restapled the document, and filed it. I looked closer at the paper. The grain was identical. The font was a 99% match. But the spacing between the paragraphs was off by a fraction of a millimeter. It was a professional job, likely done by their crooked lawyer, but they had made a mistake. They assumed I would never look. They assumed I was a naive girl from Ohio who would be too intimidated to read the fine print a second time. I took high-resolution photos of the forged page. I put the document back in the safe and wiped the handle. My hands were cold. This was not just a bad marriage anymore. This was fraud. This was a criminal conspiracy. They were planning to discard me with absolutely nothing, and they had manufactured the legal framework to do it. I needed verification. The next day, I took a personal day from work. I wore a baseball cap and sunglasses and drove 2 towns over to a strip mall law firm. It looked cheap, situated between a dry cleaner and a vape shop, but I knew the lawyer inside. His name was Saul, and he was the kind of lawyer you hired when you wanted to bury a body, not when you wanted to write a will. I paid him $2,000 in cash for 15 minutes of his time. I showed him the photos and my digital scan. Saul squinted at the screen through thick glasses. He hummed. "This is cute," he said, his voice raspy. "They match the printer ink type, but the toner density is different on the replaced page. See the fading on the letter E. The other pages are crisp. This page was printed on a different machine, probably a home office laser printer, not the commercial one at the firm." "Is it voidable?" I asked. "Voidable?" Saul laughed. "It is a felony. Sweetheart, if you can prove they swapped it, you can blow the whole contract out of the water, but you need the original. Do not let them destroy it." "They won't," I said. "They think it is their shield." I left his office with a new understanding of my enemy. They were arrogant, and arrogance makes people sloppy. The climax of their plan arrived on a Sunday, 2 weeks before the wine incident. It was a brunch at the estate. The weather was turning cold, the leaves changing color, but the dining room was warm and smelled of cinnamon and roasted ham. Marianne was in high spirits. She was wearing a yellow dress that was too bright for the season. She hummed as she poured tea. "We have a special announcement today," Marianne said, beaming. "Sloane, darling, why don't you share the news?" I looked across the table. Sloane was sitting next to Grant. She was wearing a loose-fitting cashmere sweater. She placed both hands on her stomach. The room went silent. "Well," Sloane said, feigning shyness, "Grant and I, that is, the family is going to get a little bigger." She looked at me then. It was brief, but it was lethal. It was a look of absolute triumph. "I am pregnant," she said. Marianne let out a shriek of delight. She clapped her hands together. "Oh, finally!" Marianne cried, tears instantly welling in her eyes. "A grandbaby, a real Wexler heir." She stood up and rushed to hug Sloane. Paisley jumped up, squealing, and joined the hug. They formed a tight circle of blonde joy, completely ignoring the fact that the man sitting next to the pregnant woman was currently married to someone else. I did not move. I looked at Grant. This was the moment a man in love would confess. This was the moment a man with a conscience would look at his wife and beg for forgiveness. Grant did not look at me. He was staring at the tablecloth. His face was pale. There was sweat on his upper lip. He did not look like a proud father. He looked like a man who had just heard a jail cell door slam shut. I realized then that this was not a happy accident for him. This was the trap. Marianne and Sloane had likely engineered this. They had secured the heir, and now Grant was locked in. He could not leave Sloane even if he wanted to. The child was the chain. "Grant," I said softly. He flinched. He looked up at me, and his eyes were hollow. "Congratulate them, Violet," Marianne snapped, breaking from the hug. Her face was flushed with victory. "Do not be bitter just because you could not provide what my son needed." Could not provide, as if I were a defective appliance. "I see," I said. "So this was the plan all along." "The plan," Marianne said, her voice hardening, "was for Grant to be happy, and now he has a woman who fits. He has a child on the way. You are just lingering, Violet, like a bad cold." "Grant," I asked again, "do you have anything to say?" Grant swallowed hard. He looked at his mother, then at Sloane, and finally at me. The fear in his eyes was replaced by a dull resignation. "It is for the best, Violet," he mumbled. "Just let it go." He was a coward, a weak, spineless man who had let his mother arrange his life, his mistress, and his child. I stood up. I did not flip the table. I did not scream. I felt a cold detachment settle over me like a layer of ice. "I will be in my room," I said. I walked out of the dining room, listening to the chatter resume behind me. They were already discussing nursery colors. They had moved on. I was already a memory to them. I went upstairs to the guest room I'd been sleeping in for the last week. I sat on the edge of the bed. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was my secure line. A text message from an unknown number. I frowned. Only 3 people had this number: my CFO, my head of security, and my personal assistant. I opened the message. Sender unknown message. They do not just want to kick you out. They want to take what they think you have. Check your secondary account, the one you use for the groceries. My blood ran cold. I opened my banking app on the phone. I navigated to the small, local bank account I used for household expenses, the one account where I kept a normal amount of money, about $15,000, which I told Grant was my life savings from my years of working. The balance was 0. I checked the transaction history. Transfer to Wexler Management LLC. Authorized by joint holder Grant Wexler. They had drained it. It was not about the money. $15,000 was what I made in 10 minutes of interest. It was the principal. They thought that was everything I had. They thought they were taking my safety net. They thought they were leaving me destitute, so I would have no money for a lawyer, no money for a hotel, no choice but to crawl away and disappear. They stole what they thought was my survival money. I stared at the screen. The text message had come from someone who knew what they were doing, someone watching. I did not know who sent the warning, but they were right. The Wexlers were not just cruel, they were thieves. I looked at the empty balance, and a dark laugh bubbled up in my throat. They stole $15,000 from a woman who could buy their bank. Okay, I whispered to the empty room. You want to play pirates? Let us see who sinks first. I put the phone away. I had the prenup evidence. I had the infidelity confirmation. I had the theft. The investigation was over. It was time for the execution. I sat in the back of the town car I had summoned, watching the iron gates of the Wexler estate disappear into the darkness behind me. The driver, a man on my private payroll who had been stationed nearby for weeks on standby, did not ask questions. He simply handed me a warm towel and a bottle of water. I wiped the sticky, drying wine from my neck. The smell was pungent, a mixture of tannins and humiliation. But as the car glided onto the highway, putting miles between me and the people who had treated me like a stray dog, a strange transformation took place. The trembling stopped. The tears dried. The posture of the beaten wife straightened into the spine of a CEO. They thought they had just evicted a nobody. They thought Violet Cox was a simple data analyst with a small savings account and no family connections. They thought they had discarded a woman whose only value was her silence. They were wrong. My name on my birth certificate is Violet Cox. That is true. But in the boardrooms of Silicon Valley, in the high-frequency trading floors of New York, and in the encrypted ledgers of the global banking system, I am known by a different name, Violet Vale. I am the founder and majority shareholder of North Star Gridworks. We do not make flashy consumer apps. We do not make social media platforms. We build the invisible skeleton of the internet. We manage the cloud security for 3 of the 5 largest banks in the world. We handle the data infrastructure for hospital networks, shipping logistics, and government compliance systems. If North Star goes offline for 10 minutes, the economy loses billions. My company was valued at $7.4 billion in the last fiscal quarter, and I owned 51% of it. I looked at my reflection in the darkened window. The woman staring back at me looked wrecked, but behind the smeared mascara, the eyes were clear. I have spent the last 7 years hiding this truth. It started after my first serious relationship in my 20s. His name was Mark. He was an artist, or so he claimed. I was young, having just sold my first startup, and I was naive. I let him in. I let him see the bank accounts. I let him see the power. Mark did not love me. Mark loved the access. He sold stories about me to the tabloids. He tried to embezzle money from my accounts to fund his gallery. When I broke up with him, he sued me for emotional distress and dragged my name through the mud. The press had a field day. The tech heiress and the starving artist. They called me cold. They called me calculating. They analyzed my wardrobe and my spending habits until I felt like a specimen in a jar. That was when Violet Vale vanished from the public eye. I hired a reputation management firm to scrub my photos from the internet. I stopped doing video interviews. I sent proxies to accept awards. I legally separated my personal life from my professional identity. Violet Vale became a ghost, a signature on legal documents, a voice on conference calls. Violet Cox was created to be the person who could be loved. I wanted a man who would love me for my mind, for my humor, for the way I make coffee in the morning, not for the size of my stock portfolio. I wanted to be chosen, not targeted. When I met Grant, I thought I had found it. I thought his lack of interest in my data entry job was refreshing. I thought his questions about my family were just polite curiosity. I thought he was the one man in Illinois who did not care about status. I realized tonight, sitting in this car, how stupid I had been. Grant did not pass my test because he was noble. He passed it because he was indifferent. He never asked about my work because he assumed it was beneath him. He never dug into my background because he assumed there was nothing to find. He did not love Violet Cox for her simplicity. He tolerated her for her convenience. The irony was suffocating. I reached into my purse and pulled out my secure phone. I unlocked the hidden partition of my digital life. I scrolled to a folder titled Anniversary. It was just 3 days away, our 1-year anniversary. While Grant was busy planning his divorce and impregnating his mistress, I had been planning a merger. The Wexler family business, Wexler Hospitality, was bleeding money. Their flagship hotels were outdated. Their brand was fading. They were drowning in debt and pride. I knew this because I had analyzed their books months ago. I had set up a shell company. I had negotiated a deal to buy a chain of boutique resorts in the Pacific Northwest, stunning, profitable properties that were exactly what the Wexler portfolio needed to survive. I was going to give it to him. I was going to sign the deed over to Wexler Hospitality as an anniversary gift. I was going to reveal who I was, save his family's legacy, and say, I did this because I love you. I did this because we are partners. The legal papers were sitting in a safe in my lawyer's office downtown. They were drafted. The funds were in escrow. The purchase price was $45 million. I was going to pay cash. I looked at the file on my screen. Project Blue Horizon. I laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound that startled the driver. I was going to save them. I was going to use my empire to shore up their crumbling castle. I was ready to be the hero of their story. And they poured wine on my head. I selected the folder. I hit delete. I confirmed the action. The file vanished. I did not want to save them anymore. I did not want their love. I did not want their acceptance. Love is a liability. Love is a blind spot. Tonight, they taught me that the only language the Wexlers understand is leverage. They respect power. They respect the hand that holds the whip. So I will stop being the wife. I will go back to being the CEO. I opened my email. A flagged report from my CTO caught my eye. It was a standard compliance update regarding our banking clients. But one detail stood out now in a way it never had before. Subject Regional Banking Covenants. Q4. Update. I opened the attachment. The Wexler family fortune was tied up in loans from a specific regional bank, First Illinois Commercial. To maintain those loans, hundreds of millions of dollars in real estate leverage, the bank required all commercial borrowers to meet new, stringent federal data security standards by the end of the year. If a borrower failed to upgrade their systems to the new compliance level, the bank was legally required to call the loans. It was a technicality, a boring, bureaucratic rule. But here was the twist. There was only one company in the Midwest certified to implement those specific security upgrades within the deadline. North Star Gridworks, my company. I read the report again to be sure. First Illinois Commercial had signed an exclusive vendor agreement with North Star. We were the gatekeepers. If a company wanted to pass the bank's audit, they had to go through our servers. They had to use our software. They had to sign a contract with us. I closed my eyes and pictured Howard Wexler. I pictured him sitting in his study, drinking scotch, worrying about his loans. He probably had a note on his desk right now reminding him to call it vendor for bank audit. He had no idea that the vendor was his daughter-in-law. He had no idea that the woman he treated like furniture held the only key to keeping the bank from seizing his properties. They had not just divorced a wife. They had evicted their only lifeline. They had severed the connection to the one person who could stop the avalanche. I felt the car slow down as we approached my penthouse in the city, the real one, not the studio decoy, the doorman, who knew me as Ms. Vale. Opened the door. "Welcome back." "Ms. Vale," he said, not batting an eye at my stained dress. "Thank you." "Arthur," I said. I walked into the lobby. The marble was cool and quiet. I stepped into the private elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. As the elevator rose, lifting me back into the stratosphere where I belonged. I made the call. I dialed the number of Marcus, my chief financial officer. It was 11 at night, but Marcus picked up on the first ring. He knew I never called this late unless the world was ending or beginning. "Violet?" he asked, his voice alert. "Is everything okay? You have been off the grid." "I am back, Marcus," I said. My voice was steady. It sounded like the voice of the woman who had built a billion-dollar company from a laptop in a dorm room. "Good to hear," Marcus said. "We have the quarterly projections ready for—" "Forget the projections," I cut him off. The elevator doors opened. I stepped into my penthouse. The lights flickered on automatically, revealing the panoramic view of the Chicago skyline. The city looked like a circuit board of gold and white light. "I need you to open a new file," I said. Walking to the wet bar, I poured myself a glass of water. "I need a full risk assessment and debt exposure analysis on a specific entity." "Name the target," Marcus said. I could hear the typing of his keyboard already. "Wexler Holdings," I said, "and every subsidiary attached to it, every LLC, every trust, every mortgage." The typing stopped for a second. "Violet," Marcus said, his tone cautious. "Isn't that your husband's family?" I looked at my reflection in the glass of the window. The red wine stain on my dress looked like dried blood. "Ex-husband," I corrected. "As of 2 hours ago." "I see," Marcus said. The typing resumed, faster this time, aggressively. "They have a compliance deadline with First Illinois Commercial in 45 days, I said. "They need North Star certification to keep their loans from defaulting." "Yes," Marcus said. "That is standard for all First Illinois clients. We have a queue." "Flag their application," I ordered. "When it comes in, I want it on my desk. Do not approve it. Do not reject it. Just hold it." "Understood," Marcus said. "And the debt analysis." "I want to know who holds their paper," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "I want to know who they owe money to. I want to know who they are afraid of. If there is a loan for sale on the secondary market, I want to buy it. If there is a lien, I want to own it." "Violet," Marcus said softly, "this is a hostile takeover strategy. Are we acquiring them?" "No," I said. "We are not acquiring them. Acquisition implies value." I took a sip of water. It was clean. It was pure. It tasted nothing like the wine they had forced on me. "Open the list, Marcus," I said. "I want to know exactly which string they are hanging by, because I intend to be the one who cuts it." The conference room on the 42nd floor of the North Star building was not designed for comfort. It was designed for war. The walls were glass, offering a view of the city that looked like a motherboard of light, and the table was a slab of black marble that felt as cold as the November air outside. It was 3 in the morning. My dress, the red one stained with wine, was finally gone. I had changed into a fresh suit from the emergency wardrobe I kept in my office, charcoal gray, sharp lines, tailored to kill. I sat at the head of the table, flanked by Marcus, my CFO, and Elena, the head of my internal legal counsel. On the screen surrounding us, the Wexler family life was being vivisected. "We are not just looking for cracks," I told them, sipping black coffee. "We are looking for structural failure. I want to know where the rot is." Marcus tapped a key, and the main screen filled with a complex web of flowcharts. "It is worse than we thought." Violet, Marcus said, his voice low and serious. Or better, depending on how you look at it, the Wexler Empire is not a fortress. It is a Ponzi scheme running on fumes. He pointed to the central node Wexler Holdings. They are over-leveraged by about 400%. Marcus explained. Howard has been cross-collateralizing assets for years. He takes a loan out on Hotel A to pay the mortgage on Hotel B. When Hotel B needs renovations, he borrows against the equity in the family estate to cover it. It is a shell game. I leaned forward, studying the numbers. How much time do they have? I asked. Marcus highlighted a column of dates in red. Based on the maturity dates of their short-term commercial paper and the balloon payments due on the Briar Glen property, the entire structure collapses in 60 to 90 days. Unless they get a massive injection of capital or refinance their primary debt with First Illinois Commercial. And they cannot refinance, I said, a cold smile touching my lips, because they need a tech compliance audit to qualify for the new banking standards, and I own the company that performs the audit. Exactly, Marcus nodded. They are sprinting toward a cliff, and you are the only one who can build the bridge, and they just pushed you off it. Elena, my lawyer, cleared her throat. She slid a tablet across the marble table toward me. It gets uglier. Violet, she said. We started digging into Howard's personal ledger. The man is not just bad at business. He is committing fraud. I looked at the tablet. It showed a series of transfers from the Wexler corporate accounts, money meant for maintenance and payroll moving into a generic LLC called Greenbrier Consultants. What is Greenbrier Consultants? I asked. We do not know yet. Elena said. It is registered in Delaware with a blind proxy. But look at the amounts. 10,000 here, 15,000 there. It adds up to nearly $200,000 over the last 18 months. He is siphoning money out of the company to hide it. He is cooking the books to keep the cash flow looking positive for the lenders. But in reality, he is bleeding the company dry. If the bank finds out about this, I said, realization dawning, they will not just call the loan, they will indict him. Elena nodded. Federal wire fraud, bank fraud. If we hand this to the SEC or the IRS, Howard goes to prison. I sat back. I had the power to put my father-in-law behind bars. The man who wouldn't look at me at the dinner table was a criminal. It fitted. His arrogance was a cover for his desperation. What about the sister? I asked. Paisley. Marcus sighed and pulled up a credit card statement. It was comical. Paisley is listed as the Director of Social Outreach for Wexler Hospitality. Marcus said, her salary is $80,000 a year, but her corporate credit card expenses are nearly double that. I scanned the list. Spa treatments, designer handbags, VIP tables at clubs in Miami. She is treating the company treasury like her piggy bank. I noted, and look at the cash advances. Marcus pointed out. Every Friday, she withdraws $500 in cash from a specific ATM near the casino district. It is consistent. She has a gambling problem, or a drug problem, or both, and Howard is covering it up by classifying it as entertainment expenses. The family was rotting from the inside out. They walked around with their noses in the air, judging me for my simple background, while they were living on stolen time and embezzled money. But the biggest shock came next. Let us talk about Sloan, I said. The golden girl, the heiress. Elena hesitated. She tapped her screen, and a new profile appeared. Violet. Elena said gently, Sloan Mercer is not an heiress. She is destitute. I stared at the screen. What? Her family lost their money in the crash of 2008. Elena explained. Her father's trust was dissolved 5 years ago. Sloan has been living on credit cards and personal loans for the last 3 years. She is 2 months behind on her mortgage, the house where Grant has been sleeping. Her car is leased in Marianne Wexler's name. I blinked. Processing this, Marianne was paying for Sloan's life. It is a symbiotic relationship, Elena said. Marianne pays Sloan's bills to keep up appearances. She needs Sloan to look like the perfect, wealthy socialite to match Grant, and Sloan needs the Wexler money to survive. She trapped Grant not because she loves him, but because she needs a bailout. I laughed. It started as a chuckle and grew into a genuine laugh of disbelief. So, I said, shaking my head, They kicked out the only actual billionaire in the room to replace me with a woman who is technically bankrupt. Grant did not upgrade. He bought a liability. He thinks he is marrying into a dynasty, but he is marrying into a foreclosure. This was the masterstroke of irony. Marianne's obsession with breeding and class had blinded her to the only thing that actually matters in their world: solvency. She had engineered a marriage between two drowning people, thinking they would float. I stood up and walked to the window. The city lights below seemed to mock them. "Is the PI report back?" I asked, turning to face the room. Elena nodded. She opened a physical file folder. "We have the infidelity proof," she said. "Dates, times, hotel receipts from the Palmer house. Text messages recovered from Grant's cloud backup because, as you noted, his password was his birthday." I flipped through the pages. It was all there. The "I love yous," the "I can't wait until she is gone," the mockery of me. Reading it did not hurt anymore. It just felt like reading a script for a bad soap opera. "And the prenup?" I asked. Our forensic document examiner confirmed it. Elena said, "The page was swapped. We have the microscopic analysis of the toner ink. It is a mismatch. If they try to enforce that prenup in court, we will not only void it, we will have their lawyer disbarred for facilitating fraud." I closed the file. The evidence was overwhelming. I had enough to bury them. I had enough to destroy their reputation, their finances, and their freedom. I looked at the corner of the table where a thick binder sat. It was labeled Project Blue Horizon. That was the deal for the resort chain. The $45 million gift I was going to give Grant for our anniversary. The lifeline that would have saved his family's business. I walked over to it. I picked it up. It felt heavy. Marcus watched me. "Do we proceed with the acquisition?" he asked. I looked at the binder. I thought about Grant's face when he handed me the divorce papers. I thought about the wine dripping onto the floor. I thought about Marianne calling me a project. "No," I said, "kill it." I walked to the shredder in the corner of the room. I fed the title page of the project into the machine. The teeth of the shredder roared, eating the paper, turning $45 million of potential salvation into confetti. "We are not saving them," I said, my voice hard. "We are pivoting to strategy B. We are going to buy their debt." I turned to Marcus. "Contact the secondary debt market. Find out who holds the paper on the Briar Glen estate. Find out who holds the mortgage on the downtown office building. If it is for sale, I want it. I want to own the roof over their heads. I want to own the ground they walk on. And one more thing," I added, "Sloane's debt. Who holds her credit card debt?" "A collection agency in Jersey," Marcus said. "Buy it," I ordered. "Buy it all. I want to be the one calling her house when she misses a payment." Elena cleared her throat again. "Violet, there is one last thing." She held up a USB drive. "The private investigator placed a listening device in the dining room after you left," she said. "One of the catering staff is on our payroll." He dropped a bug in the floral arrangement on the sideboard. I took the drive. My hand trembled slightly. I thought I had heard the worst of it. "This was recorded about 20 minutes after you were thrown out," Elena said. While they were having dessert, I plugged the drive into the main console. I pressed play. Static filled the room, followed by the clinking of silverware. Then, Marianne's voice cut through the air, clear and sharp, crying like a child. "Did you see her makeup running pathetic?" Grant's voice followed. "She will sign. She has no fight in her. She is weak." Then a pause, and then Marianne spoke again, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that made my blood freeze. "Let her sign the divorce papers first. Grant, get the signature. Make it legal. Once she is officially out, then we check her pockets." Grant asked, "What do you mean?" Marianne laughed. "The girl saved money. She lived like a nun. There must be a retirement account, or a savings bond, or something she hid. Once the divorce is final, I will have our lawyer subpoena her financials for hidden marital assets. We will claim she stole from the household budget. We will bleed her for whatever scraps she has left. We need every penny for the baby." I stopped the recording. Silence filled the conference room. They did not just want me gone. They wanted to loot the corpse. They thought my meager savings, the money they had already stolen from the joint account, was not enough. They wanted to sue me after the divorce to strip me of anything I might have hidden. They were wolves, hungry, desperate wolves. But they had made a fatal miscalculation. They were planning to hunt a rabbit, and they had just walked into the cave of a dragon. I looked at Marcus and Elena. Their faces were grim. They were angry on my behalf. Check her pockets. I repeated Marianne's words. I smiled. It was the smile I wore when I acquired a competitor. It was the smile I wore when I knew the other side had already lost. And they just didn't know it yet. Fine, I said. If they want to check my pockets, let us invite them in. I turned to Marcus. Draft a response to the divorce papers. I said, agree to everything. Do not fight the prenup yet. Do not fight the separation. Let them think I am rolling over. Let them think I am the weak, pathetic girl they threw out. I want them to feel safe, I said, walking back to the window to look out at the city that I helped build. I want them to think they have won. I want them to schedule the victory party, because when I walk back into that house, I want the shock to stop their hearts. I touched the cold glass. You want to look in my pockets? Marianne, I whispered to the reflection of the city. Be careful. You might find the deed to your own life inside. Silence is a weapon. The Wexlers thought my silence was the whimper of a defeated dog. They thought that because I had stopped calling, stopped arguing, and stopped appearing in their driveway, I had accepted my fate. They interpreted the lack of noise as submission. They were wrong. In the world of high-stakes finance, silence is not retreat. Silence is the sound of the predator acquiring the target. For the next 3 weeks, I did not exist as Violet Cox, the discarded wife. I existed entirely as Violet Vale, the CEO of North Star Gridworks, and I ran my revenge like a hostile takeover. I sat in my office, the city of Chicago sprawling beneath me like a game board. Marcus, my CFO, sat across from me. We had replaced emotional outbursts with spreadsheets. We had replaced tears with acquisition orders. Phase 1 was the debt. The Wexler family empire was built on a foundation of loans that were traded between banks like baseball cards. When a company is as shaky as Wexler Hospitality, traditional banks often sell off the debt to private equity firms or hedge funds to mitigate their risk. It is a standard practice. Find the tranches. I told Marcus, I do not want the mortgage on the house yet. That is too personal. I want the operating capital. I want the loans that keep the lights on in their hotels. Marcus typed on his secure terminal. There is a bundle available, he said. $3.2 million in short-term commercial paper. It is held by a distressed asset fund in New York. It covers the vendor payments for their 3 biggest properties. If this debt is called, they cannot pay their food suppliers. Buy it? I said. Marcus hesitated. We cannot buy it as North Star. He reminded me. It would show up on the disclosure forms. Use the shell, I said. Use Obsidian Capital. Obsidian Capital was a dormant LLC I had registered 5 years ago in the Cayman Islands for a project that never launched. It had no traceable link to me, no public officers, and a mailing address in a lawyer's office in Grand Cayman. Within an hour, the transaction was complete. Obsidian Capital Me was now the primary creditor for the Wexler food and beverage operations. I owned the debt that put steak on their tables and wine in their cellars. I did not call the debt immediately. I just held it. I wanted them to feel the noose before I tightened it. Phase 2 was the talent drain. The Wexlers were terrified of the upcoming bank audit from First Illinois Commercial. I knew this because I had read their frantic emails to their IT department. They needed to upgrade their cybersecurity protocols to meet the new federal standards, or the bank would freeze their lines of credit. Their IT department was led by a man named David Chen. He was brilliant, underpaid, and constantly verbally abused by Grant, who thought computers were magic boxes that should just work for free. I called my head of HR. Get me David Chen. I said, we cannot just call him, she said. It looks aggressive. We are not poaching him, I said, spinning a pen in my hand. We are offering him a career. Offer him a position as a senior systems architect at North Star. Offer him a 40% raise. Offer him stock options. and tell him he has to start immediately. 2 days later, David resigned from Wexler Hospitality. Grant called me, or rather, he called the number he thought belonged to his meek ex-wife. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message screaming that I had cursed him, though he had no idea I was the one who hired David. He just knew his head of IT had walked out the door 2 weeks before a critical audit. Without David, their compliance preparation ground to a halt. They were now a ship without a navigator, drifting toward a rocky shore, and they did not even know the lighthouse keeper had quit. Phase 3 was the market squeeze. I picked up my personal phone and called the CEO of Crown Harbor Stays. His name was Arthur, and he was a fierce competitor of the Wexlers. We had served on a tech board together years ago. "Arthur," I said, "it is Violet." Violet, Arthur's voice boomed. "I have not heard from you in ages. I heard you were taking a sabbatical, something like that." I said, "Listen, Arthur, I am looking at your holiday bookings for the Midwest region. They look a little soft." "They are," he admitted. "The economy is down. I have a proposal." I said, "North Star has a surplus of ad credits on several major travel platforms. We are looking to offload them as a tax write-off. I can funnel them to Crown Harbor. You can run a flash sale. 50% off all luxury suites in Briar Glen and Lake Haven for the entire month of December." Arthur went silent. 50%, he asked. "That is below cost. I will subsidize the difference." I said, anonymously, "Of course, through a marketing grant." Why, Arthur asked, suspicious. "Let us just say I am not a fan of your competition." I said. Arthur laughed. "I do not ask questions when money falls from the sky. Let us do it." 3 days later, Crown Harbor launched a massive Winter Wonderland sale. Their billboards went up right next to the Wexler properties. Their ads flooded social media. The impact was immediate. Wexler Hospitality, which relied on holiday bookings to cover their Q4 losses, saw a massive drop in reservations. Cancellations poured in as guests switched to the cheaper, nicer Crown Harbor hotels. I watched the daily revenue reports of the Wexler chain, which I could access because I had bought their debt turn redder and redder. Phase 4 was the divorce. My lawyer sent the papers to Grant. We did not ask for alimony. We did not ask for the house. We did not ask for a share of the business. We agreed to the terms of the forged prenup. Grant signed them so fast, the ink barely had time to dry. He thought he had pulled off the heist of the century. He had gotten rid of the wife, kept the money, kept the house, and secured his mistress. I received a text from him the day the decree was finalized. "Grant, it is done. I hope you find someone more your speed. Take care." It was the take care that made me smile. It was the condescension of a man who thinks he is speaking to a victim. Meanwhile, the social fallout was beginning. Marianne could not help herself. She was telling everyone at the Briar Glen Country Club that she had finally taken out the trash. She bragged about how easy it was to get rid of me, but then the video leaked. I did not leak it. I simply sent the file to a few anonymous accounts on a forum frequented by the local elite. The video of Marianne pouring wine on my head. It spread through the private WhatsApp groups of the neighborhood like wildfire. The reaction was mixed. Some of the old guard supported Marianne, but many of the younger, wealthier members, the ones the Wexlers needed to impress, were disgusted. They saw it for what it was: bullying. It did not destroy the Wexlers socially, not yet, but it made them look tacky. It made them look cruel, and cruelty is only tolerated when you are rich. When you are poor, cruelty is just trashy. And the Wexlers were about to be very, very poor. Phase 5 was the land. I waited until the divorce was official. I waited until Grant felt safe. Then I made my biggest move. The Wexler corporate headquarters was not in the estate. It was in a boutique office building downtown. A prestigious address that Howard loved because it sounded important, but Howard did not own the building. He leased the top 2 floors. The building was owned by a real estate investment trust in Chicago. I called the manager of the trust. "I want to buy the building at 1400 State Street." I said, "It is not for sale." He replied, "Everything is for sale." I said, "I will offer you 20% over market value. Cash. Closing in 48 hours. Greed is predictable. He sold. On a Tuesday morning, the ownership of the building transferred to another one of my shell companies, Ironclad Properties. I did not evict them, not yet. I simply became their landlord. I owned the elevator they rode. I owned the lobby where they put their logo. I owned the very walls that held their secrets. I sent a notice of change of management to their office. It was standard, boring. They probably filed it without reading it. They had no idea that their ex-daughter-in-law now held the keys to their front door. Finally, the trap was ready. It was time for the bait. The Wexlers were panicking. Their IT director was gone. Their loans were about to be called by the bank. Their revenue was tanking because of the Crown Harbor sale. They needed a miracle. I sent them one. I had the vice president of business development at North Star, a woman named Sarah, who knew the plan, send a formal letter to Howard Wexler. Subject: strategic partnership opportunity. Compliance assistance. The letter was a masterpiece of corporate speak. It stated that North Star Gridworks was looking to expand its hospitality portfolio. It offered a comprehensive technology audit and compliance rescue package for struggling regional hotel chains. It hinted at capital investment. It hinted at a bailout. It was the lifeline they were praying for. I was in my office when the reply came. Sarah walked in, grinning. They bit. She said, "Howard called me personally. He sounded desperate. He wants to meet. He says they are the perfect candidate for the partnership." "Of course he does," I said, looking at the email. "Did he mention terms?" "He said they are open to equity sharing." Sarah said, "He is willing to sell a piece of the company to save the rest." I stood up and walked to the mirror. I checked my reflection. I looked sharp, dangerous. "Set the meeting." I said, "There is a catch." Sarah said, "Marianne got on the line." "Marianne?" I asked. "Yes. She insisted on coming, and she insisted on meeting the CEO. She said she does not want to deal with middle management. She wants to look the founder of North Star in the eye to ensure our values align with the Wexler family." I laughed. It was a genuine, delighted laugh. "She wants to check our values." I repeated, "That is rich. She wants to meet the CEO." Sarah confirmed. "What should I tell her?" "Tell her yes," I said. "Tell her the CEO is very private. Tell her the CEO rarely takes meetings. But tell her that for the Wexler family I will make an exception." Sarah nodded, typing on her tablet. "When tomorrow?" I said, 2:00. "Where here?" I said, "The top floor." "But Violet," Sarah cautioned. "If they come here, if they see you, that is the point." "Sarah," I said. Turning back to the window, I imagined the scene: Marianne, Grant, and Howard walking into the lobby of the North Star Tower, taking the elevator up 40 floors, thinking they were about to charm some tech nerd out of millions of dollars, thinking they were about to secure their future. They had no idea they were walking into the slaughterhouse. "Tell them to bring the full financial disclosures," I added. "Tell them the CEO requires total transparency." I looked down at the city one last time. Grant thought I was a girl who crunched numbers for a living. He was right, but he forgot to ask which numbers I controlled. I picked up my phone and sent a text to the security desk in the lobby. "Tomorrow at 2 p.m. A group from Wexler Holdings will arrive. Issue them visitor passes. Escort them directly to the boardroom. Do not announce my name." The guard replied instantly, "Copy that. Ms. Vale." I put the phone down on the cold marble table. The silence in the room was no longer empty. It was heavy with anticipation. The mouse had taken the cheese. Now, all I had to do was snap the neck. The camera feed on my tablet was high definition, crisp enough to see the beads of sweat forming on Howard Wexler's hairline. I stood in the anteroom adjacent to the main boardroom, watching them. They had arrived 10 minutes early, desperate to make a good impression on the mysterious savior who was going to rescue their crumbling empire. They looked like a tableau of decaying aristocracy. Howard was wearing a suit that probably cost $5,000, but it hung loosely on his frame. He had lost weight. The stress of the looming bank audit and the tanking revenue was eating him alive. He kept tapping his fingers on the mahogany table, a nervous, staccato rhythm that betrayed his fear. Marianne sat to his right. She was dressed for battle in a Chanel suit. Her hair sprayed into a helmet of perfection, but her eyes were darting around the room, assessing the cost of the artwork, the view of the city, the sheer scale of North Star's power. She looked like a thief casing a jewelry store. Grant sat across from them. He looked exhausted. The arrogant smirk he had worn at the dinner table was gone, replaced by the dull gray look of a man who was not sleeping. Next to him sat Sloane. She was the centerpiece of their new narrative. She wore a maternity dress that accentuated the bump, her hand resting on it protectively. It was a performance. She looked around the boardroom with a mix of awe and greed, likely calculating how much of this wealth she could eventually siphon off. I checked my watch. 2:00. Marcus, my CFO, stood by the door. "Shall we go in?" he asked. "No," I said, my eyes fixed on the screen. "Let them wait." "How long?" 7 minutes, I said. 7 minutes is a psychological eternity in a business setting. 5 minutes is a delay. 7 minutes is an insult. It creates a vacuum where insecurity breeds. I watched them on the screen. At 2:03, Howard checked his watch and frowned. At 2:05, Marianne whispered something to Grant, looking annoyed. She smoothed her skirt, her posture stiffening. At 2:06, Sloane sighed loudly and reached for the water pitcher, her hand shaking slightly. The silence in that room must have been suffocating. They were surrounded by the symbols of success, the glass walls, the sprawling view of Chicago, the heavy scent of leather and money, and they were realizing just how small they were in comparison. At 2:07, I nodded to Marcus. "Now," I said. We walked down the corridor. My heels struck the marble floor with a distinct, rhythmic click. It was the sound of approaching judgment. Elena, my general counsel, walked on my left. Marcus walked on my right. I walked in the center, wearing a midnight blue suit that was tailored to within a millimeter of perfection. My hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant knot. I wore no jewelry except for a single, platinum watch. The guard opened the double-glass doors. The sound of the heavy doors swinging open cut through the stagnant air of the boardroom. The Wexlers stood up immediately. It was a reflex of deference to money. Howard buttoned his jacket. A smile plastered on his face. Marianne composed her features into a mask of charming matriarch. Grant straightened his tie. They were looking at the door, expecting a stranger. I stepped into the room. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The air conditioning hummed. The city traffic below was a silent stream of light. Then, the recognition hit them like a physical blow. Marianne's smile froze, then shattered. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Grant blinked. He took a step back, his leg hitting the chair. He looked at me, then looked behind me for the real CEO, then looked back at me. His brain was misfiring. He could not reconcile the image of his discarded wife with the woman standing at the head of this table. "Violet," Grant whispered. It was more of a question than a name. Howard looked confused. He squinted at me. "What is she doing here?" he barked, turning to Marcus. "We are here to meet the CEO of North Star. Why is my son's ex-wife in the room?" Security. Marianne found her voice. It was shrill. "This is a joke," she hissed. "Did you follow us here? Violet, this is stalking. We have a restraining order in the works. Get out before we call the police." I did not speak. I did not look at them with anger. I looked at them with the cold indifference of an undertaker. I walked to the head of the table. I pulled out the chair, the CEO's chair, and sat down. Marcus and Elena sat on either side of me. They opened their laptops in unison. "You can sit down," I said. My voice was calm, low, and echoed slightly in the glass room. They did not sit. They stared. "I said sit down," I repeated, sharper this time. It was a command, not a request. Grant collapsed into his chair as if his strings had been cut. Howard remained standing, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "Where is the CEO?" Howard demanded. "I am not playing games with you, girl. We have a meeting with Violet Vale." I reached into the inside pocket of my blazer. I pulled out a small, heavy card case made of titanium. I slid a single business card across the polished black marble. It spun perfectly and stopped right in front of Howard's hands. He looked down at it. Violet Vale, founder, CEO of North Star Gridworks. Howard picked it up. His hands were shaking so badly the card fluttered. He read it. He looked at me. He read it again. Vale, he whispered. Violet Vale. It is my professional name, I said. Cox is my legal name, or it was, until I divorced your son. Marianne snatched the card from Howard. She stared at it. No, she said, shaking her head. No, this is fake. You printed this. You are a data entry clerk. You lived in a studio apartment. I lived in a penthouse 3 blocks from here, I corrected her. The studio was for your benefit. I played the part you wanted to see. I signaled to Marcus. He slid a thick dossier across the table. It landed with a heavy thud. Articles of incorporation, I listed, ticking them off on my fingers. Bank verification letters, SEC filings listing me as the majority shareholder. It is all there. Marianne, I did not marry Grant for his money. I have more money in my liquid trading account than your entire family trust is worth. The silence that followed was absolute. I watched the realization wash over them. I saw the moment the math hit them. They had spent a year calling me a gold digger. They had humiliated me for being poor. They had thrown me out like trash to protect their precious, dwindling fortune. And all the while, I could have bought their entire existence with a signature. Grant looked sick. He looked at Sloane, then back at me. He was realizing that he had traded a diamond for a piece of glass. You, Grant stammered. You own North Star, the cloud company. I built it, I said, from the ground up, while you were playing golf and spending your father's money. Sloane spoke up for the first time. Her voice was thin, reedy. This has to be a lie, she said, looking at Grant. She is lying. She is just trying to make us jealous. I turned my gaze to Sloane. It was the first time I had acknowledged her. Ms. Mercer, I said, you have $60,000 in credit card debt currently held by a collection agency in New Jersey. Your mortgage is 3 months in arrears. The lease on your Range Rover is being paid by Marianne Wexler. Do not speak to me about lies. You are a financial ghost. Sloane went pale. She slumped back in her chair, shielding her stomach as if I had physically struck her. Howard finally sat down. He looked deflated. The fight had left him. He was a businessman, and he knew when he was outgunned. Why are we here? Howard asked, his voice rasping. If you are who you say you are, why take the meeting just to gloat? I do not have time to gloat. Howard, I said. I am a busy woman. We are here to discuss business. I gestured to the screen behind me. It lit up with the schematics of the Wexler financial structure. It showed the red lines of debt, the looming deadlines, the chasm they were falling into. You need a compliance audit, I said. Without it, First Illinois calls your loans in 45 days. You also need a capital injection to cover your vendor payments, which are currently being held by a hostile creditor. We are negotiating with the creditor, Howard said weakly. No, you are not, I said, because the creditor is me. Howard's eyes widened. I bought your commercial paper last week, I said. I own the debt on your kitchens. I own the debt on your linens. If I snap my fingers, your hotels stop serving food tomorrow. Marianne made a sound like a wounded animal. You are evil, she whispered. You lived in our house. You ate at our table. And you do this? I sat at your table, I corrected. And you poured wine on my head. You called me a stray. You treated me like an object. I am just treating you like a business asset, Marianne. Is that not what you taught me? Values. Grant put his head in his hands. Violet, please, he said. We can fix this. I did not know. If I had known. If you had known I was rich, you would have treated me better, I asked. Is that your defense, Grant? That you are only decent to people who can pay you? He did not answer. The truth was too ugly to speak aloud. But that is not why we are really here, I said, leaning forward. We are here because I want to clear the air. I want you to understand exactly what happened to your marriage. Grant, because you seem confused. I fell in love with Sloane, Grant mumbled. It just happened. No, I said. It was scripted. I pulled the USB drive from my pocket. I plugged it into the console on the table. I found this interesting, I said. It is a recording from the library, 9 months before our wedding, before you even proposed to me. I pressed play. The audio was slightly grainy, but the voices were unmistakable. Marianne's voice. He needs to marry someone. The trust stipulates he must be married by 35 to access the full fund. A lawyer's voice. Sloane is not ready. Her divorce is messy. She needs another year to clear her name and hide the debt. Marianne's voice. Then we get a placeholder. Someone simple. Someone disposable. Grant found that girl. The analyst. She is perfect. No family. No connections. We let him marry her. Satisfy the trust requirement. And then when Sloane is clear, we switch them out. We make the girl's life miserable. She leaves. And Sloane steps in. It is a temporary arrangement, like leasing a car. The recording ended. The room was silent. Grant slowly lifted his head. He turned to look at his mother. His face was a mask of horror. You knew, Grant whispered. You told me you liked her at first. You told me to marry her. Marianne refused to look at him. She stared at the table, her jaw set tight. It was for the family. Grant, Marianne snapped. We needed the trust money. You were wasting time. Sloane was not available. We had to do something. A placeholder, Grant said, his voice rising. You made me marry her. You made me build a life with her just to throw her away. She was nobody, Marianne screamed, slamming her hand on the table. She was a nothing. How was I supposed to know she was a secret billionaire? It was a solid plan. She was supposed to disappear. I am right here, I said softly. They both froze. You manipulated him, I said to Marianne. You set him up. You ruined his life, my life, and probably Sloane's life, all for a trust fund check. I looked at Grant. You are not a victim, Grant, I said. You went along with it. You cheated. You lied. But you should know that your mother never respected you. She just moved you around like a pawn. Grant looked at Marianne with pure hatred. It was the look of a son who finally sees the monster who raised him. You destroyed everything, Grant said to her. I tried to save us, Marianne yelled. Enough, I said. The authority in my voice cut them off. I stood up. Here is the reality, I said. I am not going to invest in your company. I am not going to partner with you. I am not going to save you. I walked around the table until I was standing right behind Marianne. She flinched, but she did not turn around. You have 45 days, I said. If you do not find $50 million to refinance your debt, First Illinois will seize your assets. If you do not pay the $3 million in operating debt I hold within 7 days, I will file for insolvency against your company. You cannot do this, Howard wheezed. It is hostile. It is business, I said. I looked at Sloane. And you, I said. I suggest you check the paternity laws in Illinois. If the Wexler estate goes bankrupt, that baby is inheriting nothing but debt. Sloane looked terrified. She looked at Grant, but Grant was staring at the wall, broken. I walked to the door. Marcus and Elena stood up to follow me. I stopped with my hand on the handle and turned back to look at them one last time. Marianne was trembling. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with venom and tears. We still have the house, she spat. You cannot take the house. It is in a separate trust. I smiled. It was the only time I smiled during the entire meeting. Actually, I said, check the ownership of the building you are sitting in right now. Check the lease on your corporate headquarters. Howard went white. And as for the house, I said, I would check who just bought the mortgage note from the bank this morning. I opened the door. Now let us talk about debt, I said, my voice light as a feather but heavy as a tombstone. Because the creditor is sitting right in front of you. I walked out, leaving the door wide open, so the entire office could hear them start to scream at each other. The screaming in the hallway died down, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence as the Wexler family shuffled back into the boardroom. They looked like survivors of a shipwreck who had just washed up on a hostile shore, only to realize the island was owned by the captain they had thrown overboard. I sat at the head of the table, flanked by my legal team. I did not scream. I did not raise my voice. I simply opened the black binder in front of me. "Let us look at the anatomy of your ruin," I said, breaking the silence. I signaled to Marcus. He tapped a key, and the large screen behind me shifted. It displayed a complex map of the Wexler debt structure. It looked like a diseased root system, rotting from the bottom up. "You assumed your debts were scattered," I explained, my voice steady. "You thought you owed money to 5 different banks, 3 private equity firms, and a handful of vendors. You thought that if one creditor got aggressive, you could borrow from another to pay them off. That is how you have survived for the last decade. Robbing Peter to pay Paul." Howard Wexler wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. His hands were shaking. "But you made a mistake," I continued. "You did not realize that Peter and Paul sold their notes to the same person." I pointed to the top of the chart. A single entity was listed as the holding company for 80% of their obligations. Obsidian Capital, that is me. I said, "I own the mortgage on the Briar Glen estate. I own the lien on the downtown office building. I own the commercial paper that funds your payroll. And as of this morning, I own the promissory notes for the renovation loans on your 2 biggest hotels." Howard stared at the screen. He looked like he was having a cardiac event. "You cannot call them all at once," Howard stammered, his voice weak. "There are terms. There are grace periods." "Actually," I said, flipping a page in the binder, "there is a standard clause in all commercial lending called the cross-default provision. It means that if you default on one loan, you are automatically in default on all of them." I looked him in the eye. "You missed a payment to your food vendor 3 days ago." "Howard, a payment of $12,000. That was an oversight." Howard cried. "The accounts payable girl was out sick. It was a default," I corrected, "and because I own that debt, and I also own the mortgage, I have triggered the cross-default clause. The grace period is over. The entire amount, $52 million, is due immediately." Paisley, who had been sitting in stunned silence, suddenly stood up. Her chair scraped violently against the floor. "You want to kill us?" she screamed, her face blotchy with tears. "You are doing this on purpose. You are a monster. How are we supposed to live? I have a lease on my apartment. I have bills." I looked at Paisley. She was wearing a bracelet that cost more than my father made in a year. "You are young." "Paisley," I said coldly, "the job market is robust. I hear Starbucks is hiring. They offer excellent health benefits." Paisley let out a shriek of rage and looked at her father. "Daddy, do something. She is ruining everything." Marianne leaned forward. Her eyes were full of venom. "You are enjoying this," she hissed. "You are a sad, vindictive little girl. We took you in. We gave you a home. And because of one spilled glass of wine, you destroy a family legacy. You are evil." "Violet." I closed the binder with a snap. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. "One spilled glass of wine," I repeated. I stood up slowly. I walked over to the window, looking out at the gray sky. It was not about the wine, Marianne. The wine was just the punctuation mark. It was about the 9 months before that. It was about the way you looked at me like I was a stain on your carpet. It was about the way you made me feel small so you could feel big. I turned back to face them. "You treated me like garbage because you thought I was powerless. You thought I was disposable. You chose to be cruel because it was fun for you. I am not being cruel. Marianne, I am being legal. I am simply applying the rules of the contract you signed with the world. You borrowed money. You cannot pay it back. I am collecting." Marianne scoffed. "We have lawyers too. We will fight this. The divorce is final. The prenup protects the family assets. You cannot touch the trust." I smiled. It was a razor-thin smile. I was hoping you would bring up the prenup. I nodded to Elena. She pulled a document from her briefcase and slid it down the table. It stopped in front of Grant. Grant looked down. It was a forensic report. "What is this?" Grant asked, his voice trembling. "It is an analysis of the prenuptial agreement," I said. "Specifically, page 5. The page your lawyer swapped out after I signed it." Grant went pale. He looked at his mother. Marianne stiffened, her face losing all color. "We found the metadata on the printer," I said. "We matched the toner variants. We have a sworn affidavit from a paralegal at your firm who saw the swap happen." I leaned on the table, looking directly at Grant. "Fraud invalidates a contract." Grant, "The moment you altered that document, you voided the entire agreement, which means we are not divorced under the terms of the prenup. We are divorced under the state laws of Illinois." I paused to let the math sink in. "And since I am the injured party, and since there is proof of financial fraud and infidelity, I am entitled to claim damages. I can petition the court to freeze the family trust until the division of assets is recalculated. I can tie your money up in litigation for 10 years. Grant looked at me with horror. He realized that the clean break he thought he had won was actually a landmine. "But I do not want your money," I said, straightening up. "I have enough of my own." I looked at Sloane. She was trying to make herself invisible, shrinking into her chair. "I do want the truth, though," I said. I picked up the remote again. "Grant," I said, "you claim you left me because you fell in love with Sloane. You said she was your soulmate. You said she was the mother of your child." Grant nodded dumbly. I brought up a new slide. It was a series of screenshots, text messages. These were recovered from Sloane's phone. I said, "Do not ask me how I got them. Just read them." The messages were projected in 10-foot-tall letters on the wall. Sloane to friend. "He is such an idiot. He actually believes the condom broke." Sloane to Marianne. "I have him locked down. The test is positive. Once the baby is here, the trust fund opens up, and I can finally pay off my credit cards." Sloane to friend. "I do not care about him. I just need the Wexler name. I am tired of being broke. Once we are married, I can hire a nanny and ignore him." The room was deathly silent. Grant stared at the screen. He read the words over and over again. "He is such an idiot. I do not care about him." He turned to Sloane. His face was a mixture of heartbreak and humiliation that was painful to watch. "You said," Grant whispered, "you said it was a miracle. You said you loved me." Sloane's face crumbled. She stood up, her hands shaking. "That is fake," she screamed, pointing at me. "She faked those. She is a tech genius, right? She photoshopped them." Grant looked at Sloane. He looked at her panic. He looked at the guilt written all over her face. He stood up. "You trapped me," he said. His voice broke. "You and my mother. You both trapped me. Grant, please." Sloane sobbed, reaching for him. "I had to. I was drowning in debt. I did it for us." "Don't touch me," Grant shouted. Recoiling from her, he looked at his mother. Marianne was staring straight ahead, refusing to engage. She knew the game was up. She had bet everything on Sloane, and the horse had just broken its leg. I tapped the table. "Focus," I said. "The soap opera is over. Now we deal with the reality." I looked at Howard. He was the only one who mattered now. He was the signatory. "Here is the deal." "Howard," I said. I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "This is a deed in lieu of foreclosure," I explained. "It transfers the title of the Briar Glen estate, the downtown office building, and the 3 primary hotels to my holding company." Howard looked at the paper as if it were a death warrant. "If you sign this," I said, "I will forgive the remaining debt. I will allow you to keep your personal pensions. I will not report the embezzlement and the wire fraud to the FBI. You walk away broke, but you walk away free. And if I do not?" Howard asked, his voice barely a whisper. "If you do not?" I said, "I hand the file on Greenbrier Consultants to the United States Attorney's Office this afternoon. You go to federal prison for bank fraud. Marianne goes down for conspiracy, and I take the assets anyway through bankruptcy court." Howard looked at Marianne. She was weeping silently now, the tears ruining her perfect makeup. He looked at Paisley, who was sobbing into her hands. He looked at Grant, who was staring at the wall like a catatonic. He picked up the pen. Howard. No. Marianne gasped. You cannot give her the house. It has been in the family for 4 generations. It is not our house anymore, Marianne, Howard said, his voice defeated. It is hers. It has been hers for months. We are just squatters. He lowered the pen to the paper, but he hesitated. His pride flared up one last time. He looked at me, and I saw a flash of the old arrogance. You are bluffing, Howard said. You would not send the father of your ex-husband to prison. It would look bad for your company. Bad press. You are a public figure now. You want a quiet win. He put the pen down. I need more time, Howard said, leaning back. I want to renegotiate the valuation. The hotels are worth more than the debt. I stared at him. He was trying to haggle. He was standing on the edge of a volcano, trying to negotiate the temperature of the lava. I shook my head. Wrong answer. Howard. I picked up my phone. I dialed a number on speaker. Yes. Ms. Vale Marcus's voice filled the room. Execute Plan B. I said. Understood, Marcus said. What is Plan B? Howard asked, a flicker of panic returning to his eyes. I did not answer. 10 seconds later, Howard's phone rang. Then Grant's phone rang. Then the landline in the corner of the boardroom rang. Howard answered his cell. Wexler. He barked. He listened. His face went from pale to gray. What do you mean? Frozen, he shouted. That is our operating account. You cannot freeze payroll. We have checks going out tomorrow. He listened for another moment, then dropped the phone to the table. He looked at me with pure terror. First Illinois just froze all our accounts, he whispered. They said they received a notification of material adverse change from a primary creditor. That would be me, I said calmly. Grant looked at his phone. My credit cards are declined. Grant said, I just got an alert. All of them. Marianne's phone buzzed. She looked at it and gasped. The club, she said, her hand flying to her mouth. The country club just revoked our membership. They said our automatic payment bounced. It is a domino effect, I explained, watching them crumble. When the primary lender declares a default, the credit bureaus are notified instantly. Your credit rating just dropped to 0. Howard, every vendor, every bank, every partner you have just got an alert that you are insolvent. By the time you leave this building, I continued, the news will be on the financial blogs. Wexler Empire collapses. Your suppliers will stop their trucks. Your staff will walk out. You are not just broke. Howard, you are radioactive. Howard slumped in his chair. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out. I told you not to negotiate. I said, I gave you a lifeboat. You tried to sell it back to me. Now you drown. Grant stood up. He walked around the table toward me. He looked broken. Pathetic. Violet? Please, he said. He tried to grab my hand, but security stepped forward. He stopped. I was weak. Grant stammered. I know that, but I was forced. My mother, she controls everything. She threatened to cut me off. I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted to survive. You know me, Violet. I am not a bad person. I am just... He looked at me with pleading eyes. I am still the man you married. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had laughed while wine dripped down my face. No, Grant, I said, you are exactly the man I married. A coward. A man who chooses the easy path every single time. You chose the money over me. Then you chose the mistress over the money. Now you are trying to choose me again because I have the money. I leaned in close. You are not a victim, Grant. You are a prostitute. You just have a very low price. Grant recoiled as if I had slapped him. He stepped back, tears streaming down his face. Marianne let out a primal scream. She lunged. It happened fast. She flew out of her chair, her nails clawing at the air. Her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. You bitch, she screamed. You ungrateful, dirty little bitch. She swung her hand, aiming for my face. She wanted to slap me. She wanted to hurt me. She wanted to erase the smirk she thought she saw on my lips, but her hand never connected. The door burst open, and two uniformed security officers stepped in. One of them caught Marianne's wrist in midair. He twisted it behind her back efficiently. Marianne screamed in pain and indignity. "Let me go. Do you know who I am? I am Marianne Wexler." I stood perfectly still. I had not flinched. I looked at her, pinned against the wall by a guard who made $30 an hour. Her Chanel suit was twisted. Her hair was coming loose. She looked exactly like the white trash she had accused me of being. I nodded to the guard. "You can let her go," I said. The guard released her. Marianne stumbled, rubbing her wrist, breathing heavily. She glared at me, panting. I adjusted my blazer. I picked up my file. "Assault," I said calmly. "Attempted assault in a corporate environment, captured on 4 high-definition cameras." I looked at Marianne. "That will be useful for the restraining order." I turned to Marcus. "Draft the surrender papers again." I said, "But lower the offer. We are not forgiving the personal debt anymore. We are taking everything. The house, the cars, the jewelry. If they want to stay out of prison, they leave with the clothes on their backs." I looked at Marianne one last time. "Behavior noted." I said, "Thank you." I turned and walked toward the private elevator, leaving them in the ruins of their own making. I did not look back. I did not need to. The sound of their silence was the sweetest music I had ever heard. The courtroom was silent, save for the hum of the ventilation system and the rustling of paper as Judge Holloway turned the page of the forensic report. We were not in a family court anymore. We were in the Superior Court of Cook County, and the air smelled of floor wax and impending doom. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my spine pressed against the hard wood of the chair. I was not wearing the red dress from that night, nor the power suits of the boardroom. I wore white, pure, stark white. It was a psychological choice. I wanted to look like the ghost of the woman they had murdered. Grant sat across from me. He looked like a man who had not slept in a week. His suit was rumpled. His eyes were red. Marianne sat in the gallery behind him, her hands gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. My lawyer, a shark named Eleanor, who billed $800 an hour, stood up. "Your Honor," Eleanor said, her voice clear and cutting. "We are submitting Exhibit C, the forensic analysis of the prenuptial agreement." She walked to the bench and handed over the file. "As the court can see," Eleanor continued, "the toner density on page 5 does not match the rest of the document. We have a sworn affidavit from a former paralegal at the Wexler family firm confirming that the page was swapped after my client signed it. This was not a contract. It was a bait and switch." The judge looked at Grant. "Is this true, Mr. Wexler?" the judge asked. Grant tried to stand, but his legs seemed heavy. He looked at his lawyer, who was staring at the table, refusing to make eye contact. I did not know the specifics. Grant stammered, "My mother, the lawyers, handled it." "Ignorance is not a defense for fraud," the judge said, snapping the folder shut. "The prenuptial agreement is hereby declared void ab initio. We will proceed under standard Illinois equitable distribution laws." Marianne let out a gasp from the gallery. Void meant they were exposed. Void meant I had a claim on everything acquired during the marriage. Void meant the shield was gone. But I was not done. "Your Honor," Eleanor said, "we also submit Exhibit D, a video recording taken on the night of November 12th. I watched Grant flinch. He knew what was coming. The large monitors in the courtroom flickered to life. The scene played out in high definition, the elegant dining room, the crystal glasses, Marianne standing up, the red wine cascading over my head, and then the sound, the laughter. It filled the courtroom, echoing off the high ceilings. Grant's laughter, Marianne's laughter, Sloane's cruel, mocking giggle. I watched the jury. They were disgusted. One woman in the back row covered her mouth. The judge looked from the screen to the Wexler family with an expression of pure disdain. "This goes to character." "Your Honor," Eleanor said as the video ended, "this is the environment of emotional abuse my client was subjected to. It establishes the pattern of cruelty that justifies our claim for punitive damages." Grant had his head in his hands. He could not look at the screen. He could not look at me. While the court proceedings were dismantling their reputation, the financial world was dismantling their empire. My phone vibrated on the table. A text from Marcus. "It is done. The board voted." I allowed myself a small, imperceptible nod. Howard Wexler was not in court. He was currently in a closed-door meeting with the SEC and the Internal Audit Committee of Wexler Holdings. The evidence of his wire fraud, the transfers to Greenbrier Consultants, had been leaked to the press that morning. The headline on the Financial Times website read, "Wexler Hospitality CEO, under investigation for embezzlement." The reaction was immediate and brutal. The stock price of their publicly traded subsidiary plummeted 40% in 2 hours. The lenders, spooked by the fraud allegations, invoked the immediate repayment clauses. Howard was suspended from his own company. His access badges were deactivated. His accounts were frozen. The empire he had spent 40 years building was being carved up by auditors, and the assets were hitting the market. To cover the immediate liquidity crisis, the interim management team was forced to sell off the crown jewels, the 3 boutique hotels in Chicago, the vineyard in California, and the commercial mortgage notes. They were sold in a blind auction to the highest bidder. The buyer was a company called Vantage Point Ventures. The Wexlers did not know that Vantage Point Ventures was a wholly owned subsidiary of North Star Gridworks. I bought their legacy for 60 cents on the dollar. I bought the hotels where they had their weddings. I bought the vineyard where they spent their summers. I bought it all. Not with emotion, but with cold, hard cash. But the final blow, the one that would shatter Grant completely, was yet to come. We were in a recess. I was standing in the hallway, drinking water. Grant walked over to me. He looked like a ghost. "Violet," he said. His voice was cracked. I did not turn to face him. I stared out the window at the gray Chicago skyline. "Please," Grant said. "You have won. You proved your point. The prenup is gone. The business is crashing. Can we just stop? I will give you whatever you want. Just stop the bleeding." I turned slowly. "I want the truth about Sloan." I said. "Sloan is innocent in this," Grant said, his eyes shifting away. "She is carrying my child. Violet, have some mercy for the baby." I signaled to Eleanor. She handed me a manila envelope. I opened it and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a medical record. We subpoenaed Sloane's medical history as part of the discovery for the infidelity timeline. I said, "We wanted to confirm the date of conception to prove adultery." I held the paper up. "Grant, look at this." He squinted at the paper. It was a surgical record from a clinic in Miami, dated 4 years ago. Procedure tubal ligation. Patient Sloan Mercer. Grant stared at the words. He blinked. He shook his head. "I do not understand," he whispered. "Tubal ligation." "Grant," I said, my voice flat. "It means her tubes are tied. It means she cannot get pregnant naturally." Grant looked up at me, his face draining of all color. "But she has ultrasounds," he said. "She has the bump. She has a silicone pad and a printer." I said, "She bought the ultrasounds online. You can order them for $20. She is not pregnant. Grant, she never was." The realization hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back, hitting the wall. "She lied," he wheezed. "She needed to lock you down." I explained. "She needed the trust fund money that unlocks when you have an heir. She knew you were wavering. She knew you felt guilty about me. So she invented a baby to force your hand." Grant slid down the wall until he was crouching on the floor. He put his hands over his face. "I destroyed my marriage for a fake baby," he sobbed. "I threw you out for a lie." He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. "Violet, I am so sorry. I did not know. You have to believe me. I was played too. We were both victims here." I looked down at him, even now, in his lowest moment. He was trying to equate his suffering with mine. "We are not the same. Grant," I said, "you were played because you are greedy and weak. I was targeted because I was kind." He reached for my hand. "Violet, please, I still love you. We can fix this. I will leave her. I will testify against her. Just take me back. Help me save the family." I looked at his hand. It was the same hand that had pushed the divorce papers across the table. I reached into my bag and pulled out my tablet. I tapped the screen and held it up to his face. It was the video of the dinner. Again, I did not say a word. I just pressed play. I forced him to watch his own face, twisted in amusement. As the wine dripped off my chin, I forced him to hear his own laughter. "I love you," he had just said. "In the video?" Grant laughed. "That is your answer." "Grant," I said. I put the tablet away. "You do not love me. You just realized I'm the only person left with a lifeboat, but I'm not here to save you. I am here to watch you drown." I turned and walked back into the courtroom, leaving him sobbing on the linoleum floor. The next 48 hours were a blur of execution. The judge ruled in my favor on every count. The prenup was tossed. The assets were frozen. The damages for emotional distress were set at $2 million, a symbolic amount, but one that the cash-poor Wexlers could not pay. Because they could not pay, I moved to the next phase, enforcement. I sent the sheriff's deputies to the Briar Glen estate. It was a cold Tuesday morning. The sky was the color of slate. I parked my car, a black sedan with tinted windows, at the curb. I did not get out at first. I just watched. The moving trucks were there. Not the luxury movers they had hired to kick me out, but court-ordered eviction crews. They were carrying out the furniture, the antique sofas, the paintings, the grand piano. Grant never played. Marianne was standing on the front steps. She was wearing a bathrobe. She was screaming at a deputy. "You cannot do this," she shrieked. "This is my house. My grandfather built this house." The deputy, a large man who looked tired, held up a clipboard. "Ma'am, the deed belongs to Obsidian Capital now. You have been served the foreclosure notice 3 times. You have to vacate the premises. Now." "I do not know who Obsidian Capital is," Marianne yelled. "Get them on the phone. I want to speak to the manager." I opened my car door. I stepped out. My heels crunched on the gravel. The sound was sharp and distinct in the cold air. Marianne stopped screaming. She saw me. She looked at me, then at the deputy, then back at me. Her eyes widened. "You?" she hissed. I walked up the driveway. I stopped at the bottom of the steps, the same steps where I had stood shivering in wine-soaked silk just a few weeks ago. "Obsidian Capital is a holding company." "Marianne," I said calmly. I pointed to myself. "I am the sole proprietor." Marianne grabbed the railing. She looked like she was going to faint. "You bought my house?" she whispered. "I bought the debt," I corrected. "And since you defaulted, I foreclosed. It is standard business." "Marianne, nothing personal." She came down the steps, her face twisted with rage. "You have no right," she screamed. "You are trash. You are a nobody. You think money makes you one of us. You will never be one of us." I looked at the house. I looked at the peeling paint on the shutters that they could not afford to fix. I looked at the overgrown garden. "I do not want to be one of you," I said. I looked at the movers carrying out a velvet armchair. "Be careful with that." I told the mover, "It is going to charity." I turned back to Marianne. "Where is Grant?" I asked. Marianne let out a bitter laugh. "Grant, he is at a motel. He is trying to figure out how to pay for a divorce lawyer to get rid of that fake pregnant whore. He is ruined. We are all ruined." Are you happy? I thought about the question. Was I happy? No. Happiness is warm. This feeling was cold. It was the feeling of balancing a ledger. It was the feeling of closing a book that had been left open too long. "I am satisfied," I said. I motioned to the deputy. "Finish locking up," I said, "and change the codes on the gate." I turned to walk away. Marianne lunged forward one last time. "Violet," she screamed, "you are a thief. You stole our life. You are nothing but a gold digger." I stopped. The wind blew through the trees. I adjusted my coat. I turned around slowly to face her one last time. She stood there, shivering in her robe, stripped of her house, her money, and her pride. She looked small. I walked back 2 steps until I was right in front of her. I looked her in the eye. "A gold digger?" I asked softly. I shook my head. Marianne, you cannot dig for gold in a mine that is empty. I brought the gold. You just threw it away because you did not like the packaging. I gestured to the pile of boxes on the lawn her life, packed into cardboard. You called me a gold digger, I repeated. Now you try digging for your dignity. I did not wait for her response. There was nothing left to say. I turned my back on the Wexler estate. I walked down the long driveway, past the iron gates. I heard the deputy securing the chain. I heard the lock click shut. I reached my car. I opened the door. For the first time in a year, my chest felt light. The weight of their expectations, their insults, and their cruelty was gone. I took a deep breath. The air was cold, but it was fresh. It tasted like freedom. I got into the car and started the engine. I did not look in the rearview mirror as I drove away. I had an empire to run. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please drop a comment below with your city or country. Let us connect and share our thoughts on Violet's journey. If you enjoyed this revenge drama, please subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach more people. Your support means the world to me. Stay tuned for the next one.